my friends, welcome to this chess video, and I'd like to share a game that I played on chess.com with my friend Aldo from Mexico City, and it's a very interesting game against the King's Indian defense. Now, I have the white pieces and I play d4, Aldo plays knight f6, c4, g6, and we go into the King's Indian main line. Knight f3, castles, bishop e2, and e5. Castle, Aldo plays knight to c6. And if white really wants to get any type of advantage, he really needs to push the pawn to d5. Knight e7. And here I go in for the very famous Mar del Plata bayonet attack with b4. And it makes sense because white's pawn structure almost demands that he plays on the queen side. And he will play against the structure here, perhaps with the move c5. And of course black's idea, well, he plays to keep the position closed. He's going to play f5 and probably f4. Pawn storm the white position and try to mate white on the king's side. Now, this move b4 was for many years neglected because it was thought that, well, black can simply play a move like a5. But it was dusted down by Sokolov, who's a famous Russian grandmaster, and Vladimir Kramnik, and used with great effect against Garry Kasparov, who I think eventually gave up playing the King Indian's defense because of this variation, and you'll see why. We played a very interesting, Aldo played knight to h5, preparing of course the move f5. And here we play the interesting rook to e1. It looks a bit strange, but you'll see the reason for it in a moment. Because after f5 we have this move knight to g5. And this is the entire point of rook to e1. Because this knight here is destined for the e6 square, where black will be induced to swap it off with his light squared bishop. And rather than the position become closed, the position will open up. We might have to give up material for this, but our rationale is that in an open position with two bishops, well, it should prevail against black's close setups, the bishops proving themselves superior to the knights. There's a very interesting variation in itself. Knight to f6, bishop to f3, c6, bishop to b2, and when Aldo slightly weakens his king side with this move h6, it's then that we play the move knight to e6. And look at this knight. Smack bang in the centre of black's position. Audacious, to say the least. Well, of course such a knight cannot be tolerated, and Aldo chops it. Bishop takes e6, d takes e6. And here you will see white sacrifice the exchange to open up the position, arguing that his two bishops in an open position will prove superior to the knights and even a slight material deficit. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4, rook takes e4, d5, c takes d, c takes d, and the wonderful rook takes e5. Giving up the exchange. Bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5. Queen b6, bishop b2, and king to h6. 7. Now what has white got out of this? Well, he has 2 bishops. Position is open. He has what potentially could be a protected passed pawn. And black's king, in comparison to the white king, is looking just a little bit airy. Especially since the dark square bishop was swapped off for the rook. These dark squares look particularly weak. And white is going to argue that his bishops will prove superior to the rooks and the knight. And the pressure that he will have with his passed pawn will be telling. Queen to e2. If we could just take that back, you might be wondering, what about these 2 pawns? They seem to be hanging. Well, this position is latent with tactics. If instead of the move king h7, which Aldo played, white takes the pawn on e6, well, queen d4 is absolutely fatal, because we get to chase the king out. King is forced to avoid mate by coming to f7, queen g7 check, king e8, and queen takes h6. And it will be very difficult for this king to avoid the pressure, being surrounded merely by his own pieces. Just go back. If instead Aldo had tried queen takes b4, well, a move like rook to b1, which was Alexi Shirov's idea, because it itself contains latent tactics, and we're threatening, of course, a discovery against the queen by bringing our bishop to g7. If queen d6, well, queen d4 loses immediately. And if a move like queen h4, well, we have this very interesting variation. Bishop to d4, b6, protecting the pawn, g3, queen g5, h4, queen f5, bishop g4, queen e4, f3, and the queen is getting trapped. So Aldo himself, he very wisely recognised this, and he never took any of these pawns, and instead played the move king to h7. With queen to e2 protecting our passed pawn, rook to e8, queen to d4, and you can see how potent, whoops, the queen and the bishop are along this diagonal. Knight to f5, bishop takes, queen takes b4, and rook to c1 and rook to e7. Now, what are the essential features of this position? Well, you can see that white has an advanced passed pawn, centralized queen, supported by beautiful bishop, rook on an open file, and his king is fairly safe. Take a look at the black position by comparison. This king is a little airy, as we have said, because of the dark squares. The rooks are a little bit passive. They're blocking, of course, the advanced passed pawn. What do we really need to do is try to accentuate our strengths and diminish our opponent's strengths. Now, the only way I could find to do this was to try and swap off one of these rooks, because they are such beautiful defensive pieces, although a little bit passive, as I've said. And therefore I played the move rook to c7. I'm not entirely convinced it's the best move, because it weakens my back rank. You can have a look at this queen here. It's a little bit on a knife edge. Aldo played rook to e8 and exchanged rooks. And the queen, of course, was forced back to e7 because of the mate threats of the queen, whoops, and the bishop along this diagonal. And here I played, which is probably the losing move. If I had thought about the position and looked at black's pieces, what is Aldo's best piece? It's this knight here. It's beautifully placed. Protects g7. The rook is protecting, of course, here. And if I had found the move g4, it's essentially a winning move, because the knight has two choices. If he goes to h4, well, our pawns get to roll. f4, if black throws in a check, can simply dodge it. We have no more. He has no more checks. Queen must go back to avoid the mate threat, of course, and our pawns start to roll. It's a very difficult position for black to stop these passed pawns. If the knight after g4 goes to g7, well, again we have f4. And notice the knight cannot take this pawn on e6. If knight takes e6, well, it's just roasty toasty for black. Black ties rook to f8. Well, again, our pawns roll, and we might get a variation something like this, which of course is just winning for white. But yours truly, well, not really understanding the essence of the position. Instead of finding the move g4, I played the wussy move, g3. It does nothing to put pressure on black's position. It does nothing to take into consideration the essence of the position. It does not accentuate my strengths or diminish my opponent's weaknesses. It's just a wussy move. And Aldo played the wonderful queen to g7. And this threat to exchange queens, it simply takes all the pressure off black's position. Now, I could have played a move like queen to e2. The move I actually played was, well, queen takes on g7. Knight takes on g7 and all the pressure is off. Exchange. Try to push my pawns. But after this, it's all over, in fact. Once the rook comes into the game, my bishop's getting trapped. Try some tricks. And after h takes on g5, I simply give up and resign. My bishop, I'm going to lose my bishop. There's no way these pawns are ever going to make it. This rook will just hoover them all up. So even though it was a loss for me, I thoroughly enjoyed it because it's such a dynamic position. If we can just go back. And this move here. Rook takes on e5. White just has a beautiful position. Okay, we're down a slight material, but our pieces are just so dynamic. And it took a very average player like me to lose this position, when a much better player would have been able to do something with it. So if you're looking for a line, my friends, to play against the King's Indian defense, you like 1d4, perhaps this is a line for you. Because, as we've stated, the whole of Black's strategy in the King Indian's defense is to try to keep the position closed and mate White on the King side. And here we are, prepared to give up material to open up the position for some positional compensation. And hopefully you could do something with it where I myself failed. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was certainly a pleasure presenting it to you, and I sincerely wish you well with your own chess. Take care, and goodbye.